Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here, and today we have the great fortune to be joined by Walter Isaacson. I'm sure needs no introduction, especially this week with everything going on. But Walter, of course, written the Leonardo da Vinci biography, Einstein, plenty more, Steve Jobs, and of course, most recently joining that list, Elon Musk. So thank you, Walter, for joining us today. Pleased to have you on the podcast.
It's great to be with you, Rob, and I've been listening to your podcast for 2 years now. It's helped a lot.
That's awesome. I'm glad I could be helpful. And I'm excited to see that too, because a lot of times, we're in the Tesla space dealing with people that don't have a lot of context. And obviously, you've got more context now than anyone. So we're excited to learn about it. I think the great place to start is just, how has this experience been over the last couple of years for you?
It's been a wild ride. When I started, a little over 2 years ago, I did it because of Tesla and bringing us into the era of electric vehicles and the idea of sustainable energy being such a mission for him. And also, of course, rockets and how he was being able to bring us into a new era of space adventure travel and of commercial travel. And then, a year or so into it, he decides to buy Twitter. So it became a lot more of a roller coaster. But as you'll see from the book, I wanted to keep the focus on all the things he's focused on. And so there's a whole lot about Tesla and especially about the manufacturing process and how the development of new products happens, how Fritz von Holzhausen does the design. And I didn't want to make it just a book about Twitter turning into X. I really kept the focus on SpaceX and Tesla.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was definitely an interesting period of time for you with some unexpected twists, I'm sure, going into it. But I think the book did a great job. I finished it last night, by the way.
Thank you.
Been trying to
Long book,
crush it these
sorry,
last
but
couple of
it's
days.
short chapters.
Yeah, so I think it's like 90 chapters or something and 600 and some
Yeah,
pages. So
but
it
chapters I hope are bite-sized and race along pretty fast. I
it,
hope.
it definitely keeps it moving. I mean, it's a long book. There's a lot covered here, but it almost feels like, I don't know if you felt this way writing it, but it almost feels like maybe not each of the chapters could be its own book, but certainly, I feel like it could be almost like three or four times this, size. And how'd you kind
I
of
think you're
go
the
about
only
cutting things
person
down?
that
And
said my book should have been 3 times longer. But
well, we might be a little bit in the enthusiast crowd here in this space. So, which I think is important to keep in mind as we have this. I think a lot of your other conversations will be, pretty general about just, what was it like for Elon on Twitter and, some of his upbringing and stuff like that. And we'd love to talk about that stuff too. But I think one of the things I'm most curious about is maybe some things outside of the book, because I do expect most of the audience is going to read this. I certainly would recommend that. I'll put the link in the description. Um, how did you kind of feel going into this? How did your perception of Elon, of these companies, maybe change or not change over time? I'll just be kind of curious to hear your thoughts as you've gone through this, pretty in-depth experience.
one of the first things that changed was my understanding of his feel for engineering and especially for engineering assembly lines in factories as well as products. I thought, like in The Industrialist, he probably delegated a lot to his engineers, but more than 70% of the time when I was walking around with him, it was at meetings about products in which he drilled down deeply, or walking the assembly line in Fremont or in Giga Texas and figuring out how to be disruptive, how to make things work faster. And I guess I didn't realize the intensity of his focus on detailed engineering problems.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that was striking to me, even kind of knowing that I think Elon is doesn't quite maybe get as much credit for the engineering side of what he's accomplished. There's of course people that say Elon is just, some person that came in wealthy to America and a good investor or something like that, right? And obviously you
Right.
go through the history of that and the emerald mines and all that stuff. I'm sure, I'm glad to see that was covered and some clarity given to those topics. But I think it was striking just, how detail oriented Elon is and how he really is, the chief engineer of these companies and is driving the engineering teams. It's not just, him going in there and asking for updates or anything like that. It's really him getting in there and leading the decision making process. And that's kind of what you're saying. You
Absolutely. That's why it was so cool, to be with him, and sometimes it was really big things, like, "Let's make the Cybertruck out of stainless steel." I mean, he I think he said to me at one point, stainless steel and I should go get a hotel room together. I'm so in love with it. But he was doing it, of course, with the Starship, the big rocket, and he also understood how stainless steel could create the exoskeleton for the Cybertruck. And so those are really big decisions that he makes. But I also was just fascinated by even the smaller decisions about, the butyl patches and the floor of the car and to what extent they were necessary. And of course, as you know pretty well, but I go through it in the book, that famous mantra called the algorithm, which is a 5-step process for manufacturing, which begins with question every requirement. Now, we've got a world now, uh, we have a country that was settled by risk takers, whether they came across on the Mayflower or they came across the Rio Grande River. And people have been adventuresome in this country. But nowadays, especially when it comes to manufacturing and making products, we got more referees than we have risk takers. We've got more people, lawyers and regulators, than we have innovators and people pushing the envelope. And so, what I try to do in this book is to show how he pushes the envelope, especially when it comes to full self driving. There's a chapter at the very end, which I guess you've seen, on that amazing decision just about 6 months ago to say, let's quit making it a rules based full self driving system based on coding and hundreds of thousands of rules. And let's make it a human imitation machine learning thing based on feeding the computers visual data, video of really good people driving and what they do in each situation.
Yeah, what's your? I mean, this is maybe a little bit too in detail, but what's your kind of perception? I'm sure you got a chance to maybe experience, FSD and see the evolution of it over the couple of years that you've been following it. What's kind of your sense of just the program in general, and how important that is to Elon's time and how he manages those things? And I know that's a broad question, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, Musk is obviously obsessed with full self-driving. He has been since Autonomy Day, I think, in 2019 when he really got disruptive. He's also been wrong in his timetable. I think I can go back to 2016 in the book and show you a quote from every single year in which he said full self-driving is about a year away. But as he says, he's somebody who's able to turn the impossible into the something that's merely very late. And we're still a bit, I think, a couple of years away from full self driving. But when I saw what was happening with FSD 12, including the machine learning component and doing it by learning how human drivers handle all sorts of situations, it seemed to me, I haven't driven it yet. My Tesla has not yet downloaded it, but it seemed to me that it's a smoother ride and it's a thing that will start getting better exponentially. So whether it's a year from now or 3 years from now, the world gets transformed because as Musk says, and we talk about it in the book and he describes it, we're not just talking about self-driving being a little bit more convenient for you so you can uh, multitask when you commute to work. We're talking about changing the whole nature, perhaps, of car ownership, which is, do you even need to own a car? Or do you just summon one, a robo taxi, whenever you need to go somewhere? So he transforms things, just like Steve Jobs transformed things. He transformed the electrical vehicle industry. He transformed reusable rockets, and he did it with low Earth orbit satellites, getting the internet and recreating it in outer space. And this, along with Optimus the robot and Neuralink, are things that are going to be enormously transformative, not just making our lives a little bit better, but changing the nature of our lives.
Yeah, you bring up Optimus, and I think that's something that a lot of people are fascinated with, and probably most readers of the book, maybe don't even realize is something that Tesla is working on. Is Would you say that's a
Oh
pretty
yeah, I
high
got two
priority?
or three chapters on Optimus. I'm in love with Optimus, and there's a
Yeah,
wonderful picture of his little son X shaking Optimus' hand, and even in the whole turmoil of buying Twitter last, August, September, October. I just remember riding around with him, and his lawyers are talking to him about Twitter all the time. And he's going to see Ashok and going to see Milan and going to that Fremont headquarters and watching the steps that Optimus is taking, and even saying, "Hey, I wanted," doing the Monty Python thing on his phone, looking at the Monty Python silly walk skit. So it was something that he was clearly caring about, and every little detail cared about.
Yeah. And then on time management, which is kind of related to, FSD, Optimus, you mentioned Twitter here. I think that's something that people are always fascinated about and curious about how Elon manages these things, especially during this period of time where Twitter was so heavily involved. Um, I mean, obviously you cover this in the book, but kind of what's your sense of how Elon divides and manages all, he's six companies now. How's he doing this?
About a year ago, I made a mistake and said he likes to multitask, that he can multitask being with his mind on Optimus and then his mind on the Raptor engine for Starship and then his mind on uploading video for Twitter. Actually, the correct way I think to put it is that he serially focuses maniacally on task after task after task. And when he is focused, say, on why a valve in a Raptor engine is leaking methane, even if it's the same night that the Twitter board just accepted his offer to buy it, he will focus for an hour or 2 hours on that problem. And then his mind shifts, and it might be on the next problem. And it's almost part and parcel of a larger thing, which is he has personality mood shifts all the time. He'll be in giddy mode, then he'll be in inspiring mode, then he'll be in engineering mode, and sometimes he'll get into a very dark mode. But his mind shifts. It's as if he's batch processing rather than parallel processing sometimes.
Yeah, I think I don't know if it was Grimes that put it that way or maybe
Yeah.
Justine or someone put it that way,
I
but
think Grimes should get credit. I always try to give people credit. She says, yeah, that's in
sure.
batch. Yeah, you can tell when he's batch processing.
Sure. That's super interesting. In general, is there something that kind of sticks out over the last couple of years as maybe your favorite story from the book, or maybe it's not even in the book, but something that just kind of sticks out as an interesting moment for you over the last couple of years?
Well, I think there are just many times when so much was happening. There's scenes in April of last year. We're on the mezzanine of Gigafactory. It's just open, sort of. In fact, they're about to have a party to open Gigafactory. Kimball's there. They're doing a drone show. And Elon is flying off to the Air Force Academy for a quick speech, but he's also dealing with his lawyers because he's bought up Twitter stock and he's been offered a board seat, but he's thinking, I'm not sure I want a board seat. I might want to just take control. He's got a lot of his friends around him, Ken Howery, others, Antonio Gracias are there. And he's also dealing with, as we walk the line of Gigafactory, so a station that's taking 90 seconds. And he keeps telling the person in charge of that station, you got to get it down to 60 seconds or your resignation is accepted. And they finally do. And he's going to make that thing right. And then even that night at the Pershing, a restaurant and club in Austin, having quiet dinner. His mother's there, Grimes is there, his son Griffin and Saxon are there. So are a couple of other friends, and they're talking about buying Twitter. I could give you 20 nights like that. Last December 2nd, when he was meeting in my hometown in New Orleans with Macron, but the Twitter files were being released by Matt Taibbi. And then he was texting Barry Weiss to get her to come in and do the Twitter files. But that night, he was also meeting with Deval Shroff back in California, but he had to keep delaying it because he was flying back from New Orleans in the Macron meeting. And Deval was showing him really for the first time all the coding for this new human imitation form of full self-driving. And then after a while, everybody from Deval Shroff to his cousins, James Musk, to Barry Weiss, who's come in to do the Twitter files, they're all rummaging through the Twitter headquarters. Sort of the barbarians are at the gates and they're rummaging through the merch or they're liberating the merch. And he's holding up the Stay Woke t-shirts. So it was those nights, whether it be early April or late early December, where 15 things are happening at once and he is energized by the storm.
Yeah, I mean, that's a theme that comes through a lot in the book of there's periods of time. You talk specifically about, periods of time in 2021 where it seems like everything's going great, right? And then, is
He
Elon
doesn't like
becomes
it when things are
uncomfortable.
going great. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
And Elon
amazing
kind
to
of becomes
me.
uncomfortable during those periods and has to, push the chips all in again, live on the edge, do something, pretty drastic, obviously, with Twitter. And is your sense that that's kind of been a recurring theme and perhaps will continue to be a recurring
Well,
theme for Elon?
you've quoted his brother Kimball very early on. He says, Elon is a drama magnet. He's made for the storm. He's not made for the calm. He's a drama magnet, and Kimball said, and that's the theme of his life. And when I talked to Musk about it, Elon about it, he's like, yeah, I just can't settle back and savor, smell the flowers. I've got to put all my chips back on the table. I've got to be back all in. And it's almost the stress, the storm, uh, that energizes him, and sometimes in a dark way. I mean, he's in relationships too. Anybody who dates Amber Heard is too much, in my opinion. Now, maybe I'm different. I've been married for almost 40 years, but he's energized in his personal life and his professional life by drama.
For sure.
Makes for
One
a good
thing,
book.
it definitely makes for a good book, that's for sure. And going to, where things go from here, I don't know if you have any plans to kind of continue the story at some point, but obviously this isn't the end of it, and you got to stop at some point and publish a book at 600 pages. But as you kind of wrapped it up, and where the place that we're in right now, it seems like Twitter is maybe a little bit more stable. Obviously, there's still a lot going on, plenty of drama, but I'm kind of curious on just what your thoughts are on the trajectory from here, and maybe that compare that versus where we were, I don't know, a year ago, where things kind of were, I guess, kind of in the fire, more fully than it seems like things are getting a little bit more stable for Elon right now.
Boy, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Right.
Stability. Yeah, I think it was great that he hired Linda Yaccarino. But as you saw at the end of my book, and I congratulate you thank you for reading it.
Yeah.
In March, right when he's about to launch Starship, and right when he's about to hire Linda Yaccarino, he asked me to come to Austin. I'd been with him for about a week, and I usually would spend a week just traveling around with him, and I'd go home to New Orleans and teach at Tulane or take a little break and write. He said, "You got to come back, and something I need to talk to you about, but I don't want to do it on the phone." And it was about starting an AI company, not just an AI company that's going to compete with OpenAI, which he had helped found with Sam Altman, doing large language model generative, predictive AI based on text, but real world AI based on video data from billion frames or so a week from Tesla drivers and Optimus eventually, and combining the AI that can come from real world data and from language data. And so just when I thought all six companies are actually chugging away, he says, I'm going to start a seventh company. So I think in this book, I mean, the book, I could have waited 30 more years to write it. I think in this book, by the end, you get who he is and you see him doing all these things. And whatever he does in 2 years, which is probably start some other company on something, um, you'll get it. It'll be part of the theme. It'll be you'll say, I understand the trajectory.
Yeah, and I think that's what the book does a good job of really setting the base of the understanding, both from just Elon's upbringing, and then, like you say, things become recurring themes throughout the book. And my perception of it is, obviously it's great to have more details, but there wasn't anything necessarily that was like, oh, I'm shocked by this or I'm surprised by this. Like, Elon, I think, lives pretty transparently, and I think people that follow Elon closely are going to read the book and also, maybe not necessarily be too surprised by what it is, even
Well,
though there are
Ted,
things in there that could be a little bit shocking to some.
yeah, I mean, maybe people who listen to every one of your podcasts
Right.
won't be too shocked by things, but even even after following for a year or so, I was like surprised by a lot of the stories because they're so colorful. And also the word you use, which is transparency. I mean, I'm sitting there in every meeting when he's trying to figure out robotaxi and whether or not to have a $25,000 car with a steering wheel, a global inexpensive car based on the same platform, or whether, um, you know, even his dealings with the women in his life and the children in his life, he was, I think, consciously trying to be more transparent than anybody has ever been before to a biographer, with the possible exception of Dr. Johnson hanging around Boswell.
Sure. I mean, we've heard Elon say, sunlight's the best disinfectant. I don't think that's a quote from him, but it's certainly a quote that he
Yeah.
likes, and I feel like is applicable too. So, I mean, I don't know if this is even a great question, but there's probably way too much gray area for it. But it probably leads me into another question that I've got too. But do you feel like Elon's a good person?
That is such a people say, "Did you like him? Is he nice? Is he good?" There's so many multiple layers of Musk that it takes the complexity of a narrative to show his goodness and, in my opinion, some of his darkness.
Yeah.
I do think that he is motivated by epic good quests, almost as if he's still the child sitting in the corner of the bookstore, lonely and reading the comic books about the heroes and they're trying to save the world. So he is a good person with a vision on humanity, which is, let's try to make sure that human consciousness endures. Let's make sure that we have energy that's sustainable on this planet. And let's make sure we become a spacefaring civilization that goes to Mars and other planets. And those are noble missions, epic missions. At first, I thought they were just the, pontificating for podcasts or pep talks for teams rallies. But he'd say them often enough, I realized this is what's driving him, not being driven by money, for example. I mean, if you're totally driven by greed and money and helping yourself, you don't start a rocket company. You don't start an electric vehicle company when Ford and GM have just totally gotten out of the business. You don't buy Twitter. So, in focusing on what he thinks are the epic missions of humanity, that is his quest. And I think it's a well motivated, thus good quest. Now, let
Yeah.
me put the caveat in is he's so focused on those missions that when he's around people sometimes who aren't, say, clicking on all cylinders or getting, I guess I shouldn't use cylinders as a metaphor, but, who are not firing on all engines, uh, he can be brutal to people. He can be very not nice to the people who are around him, or he can be very cold. He can be very callous. So when you talk about being a good person, I know good people who are always caring that the person in front of them really likes them, that they're tending to the emotional needs of those around him, that they're nurturing. And Ben Franklin was a bit that way. John Adams called him insinuating, which I don't think was meant to be a compliment. Musk doesn't sit there fretting about the psychological well being and safety and nurturing of the people, uh, you know, around him. He sits there focusing on the need to pursue the mission with an urgent intensity.
And I think that's what draws a lot of criticism for Elon is his priority being more broad than the individual. And obviously that can put stress on the individual when Elon feels like that individual isn't, like you say, firing on all engines to bring things forward for humanity. Really, like
I
that's
saw him,
how Elon's
I
thinking
saw
about it.
him. Look, I mean, I remember, I can give you a dozen times. You've read some of them in the book, like in Boca Chica down on the south tip of Texas where Starship has the launch pad. A Friday night at 10 p.m. And he's walking around, and I could see it's almost, I'm from, Louisiana, so I know what storm clouds coming off the Gulf look like. And suddenly he's looking, and there's only two people working on the launch pad. And I can see him get dark and stormy. And I'm thinking, it's Friday night at 10 p.m. They don't even have a launch scheduled. And he just unloads on a guy named Andy. You'll see him in the book. And I'm thinking, and then he says, I'm going to have a surge. I want 100, 200 people here by tomorrow. We're going to work all week. We're going to stack Starship by the end of the week for no necessary reason. I mean, Starship wasn't going to launch for another year. But that surge is sometimes brutal to the people around him, but it was also energizing. They got Starship stacked. And so, is that the sign of a good person or a kind person or a motivated person? I prefer to tell the story and let the reader sort out the different missions that are either accomplished and sometimes the debris that's left in the wake.
So earlier we talked about risk and comfort, and something I was kind of wondering as I read through the book, and something I wonder frequently is, are comfort and progress sort of diametrically opposed to each other, and does Elon view it that way?
Well, I can tell you, Elon views it that way. I remember the time he walked into Twitter last October. I think it was the day before he officially took over. And they're talking to him about psychological comfort and how we nurture people. And they're showing him the yoga studio and the artisanal coffee bar and how people get mental health days off and that we're caring about people's moods and feelings. And he said, he kind of gave that, you've heard it, that sort of quick, harsh laugh. Psychological safety, that's the enemy of fierce urgency. And he said, an urgent intensity is our new operating principle. We're going to be all in, we're going to be hardcore. And he believes you have to be hardcore to push progress. And certainly the change in corporate company atmosphere from Twitter, from the day he walked in that Wednesday or Thursday before he took over, for the next 3 weeks, is probably the most rapid change in corporate culture. Do I personally believe that an urgency, intensity, all in hardcoreness is necessary for progress? I've written a lot of books. And yeah, you see that in Jeff Bezos, you see it in Bill Gates, you see it in Steve Jobs. But I've also written about Jennifer Doudna, who helped invent the tool called CRISPR that allows us to edit our own genes. And she has a different style, much more nurturing. And the people in her lab uh, aren't driven by it's 10 o'clock on Friday night and, being scared. They have a more balanced life. I think all of us have to decide, what type of people are we? What type of environment do we want to work? I talked to many people who Musk jumped down their throat at Tesla, for example. And some of them left, and then some came back. And one of them said to me, you know, I was uh, I was burned out by Elon. I had to leave, but then I went somewhere else and I got bored. And I came back because I decided I'd rather be burned out than bored. I want to be part of the mission. Every person's got to decide what type of work environment they have, and every boss has got to decide, this is the way I'm going to structure my workplace, or this is the way we're going to conduct our mission. And some people are going to do it in a more balanced, kinder, gentler way. And they'll get a lot of good people, and probably some people who are great because they don't want to work at a crazed environment. But also, if you want to work at Tesla or SpaceX or now X, you got to be all in. You got to be hardcore. And I think both approaches can coexist in this world. I worked at Time Magazine when it was a kind and gentle place. I also worked there when, the consultants took over and made it more hardcore. I ran CNN in a sort of kinder and gentler way. And you know what? I probably was wrong. It probably needed more of a disruptor than I was when I ran it. But I'm not a disruptor at heart. I just write about people who are.
Well, I think you put it well, and there's multiple ways for people to succeed and companies to succeed, and it's great that we've got different options. And obviously, Elon takes one of the more extreme ends of the options, and we've seen the results that has yielded. And obviously, it's
We've
interesting to
also seen some of the debris that lands in the wake. I mean,
certainly.
this book is not about a trajectory into orbit that's unblemished. There's a lot of rockets that explode and problems that happen at Tesla factories and people who quit and damage that I think has happened to the platform that used to be known as Twitter. So even at the end, when Starship launches and it's up for 3 minutes and it gets to the edge of space, but then there's a problem and it crashes, it was almost a metaphor. It's amazing to get this rocket up, biggest thing ever sent up as a rocket or any movable object. Yet also we have, burning debris that's landing near the launch pad.
Do you think that again, probably not the best question, but do you think that the trajectory that Elon is on is something that ends positively?
Yeah, I mean, every now and then I'm thinking, okay, this is not going to end well. I watched them fire 85% of the staff at Twitter within a 2 or 3 week period. And I'm thinking, oh man, this whole thing's not going to work. And then in the morning, I'd look at Twitter and there it would be, sometimes a little bit glitchy, but there it would be with 15% of the engineers. And there's that scene in the book of Christmas Eve. I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but they had just told him at Twitter, we can't get rid of these servers that are in a facility in Sacramento. It'll take us 6 months. He doesn't like to hear that. And so he's seething. He's on the airplane going back to Austin. And his young cousin James says, why don't we just take them out ourselves? He turns his plane around over Nevada and lands in Sacramento on the day of Christmas Eve. And they get pliers from Home Depot, and he takes a pocket knife from his security, pries open the floor of the server center while the people who run the server center are like aghast, and he's cutting out the servers. Well, that's not a simple tale. It's kind of inspiring. It's amazing. He doesn't take no for an answer. But for the next 2 months, there was a degradation of the service on Twitter. It's a long way of saying that there's not going to be a smooth trajectory to success, but Twitter has now turned into X and it's chugging along. Starship will be launched next month, I think, and we'll see. Uh, the new $25,000 global car will be transformative for Tesla, and that'll be out, within a year. Cybertrucks are starting to roll on the highways. So, no, it's not going to be a smooth trajectory upward, but things tend and trend towards surprisingly good things happening.
Yeah, I mean, I love that story in the book. It talked about, I think Elon called it Mission Impossible Sacramento. That's how he referred to that server story, and ultimately did end up admitting that that was a mistake in hindsight. You mentioned the sort of the $25,000 car there, robotaxi, etc. You mentioned that Elon working this summer on shaving milliseconds off of the production process for that next generation vehicle. We've heard that that's now going to Austin. I think that's from the book as well. Any other details on that? And obviously,
Yeah, I
people are
mean, I
very
think
curious on the timeline. And
one thing that interested me is, of course, he's going to build a factory in Mexico, which is great, and it's somewhat convenient to Austin. I mean, it's not that long of a drive, and he was going to and is going to have that be a assembly line for that next generation platform for both robotaxi and the global car. But at a certain point, he has this deep philosophy that your designers have to be sitting there right on the assembly line. That you can't design something and then send it off to, Asia to be manufactured. Otherwise, you don't have the iterative, innovative process that comes from every hour, seeing what's happening on the assembly line, what problems and successes the design is causing. And the designers and the engineers are sitting there next to the factory line workers and saying, okay, we got to fix this little butyl patch in the hole in the floor. Or we've got to fix this piece of felt that maybe we don't need beneath the battery. Or we have to, and so you end up with not only big innovation, but hourly innovation. And he said he couldn't do that if the first assembly line was down in Mexico. Because as much as his engineers and designers are hardcore, I think he perhaps realized correctly that it's kind of hard to get all of them to move to Mexico for a year and sit in an assembly line there. So he's going to design the line in Austin, and then it'll be replicated elsewhere.
Sure. And that's something that's happening right now. Is my memory correct on that?
Yeah, I think they're designing almost 2 or 3 days a week. There are meetings that he runs that's basically assembly and factory design meetings.
Okay. All right. Well, we're all very curious about that and looking forward to it. Walter, before I let you go, I know you got to go. Is there anything else that you want to cover, or you think we got it all?
Well, there's a lot we could cover. I guess maybe that's why the book is out there. Thank you for linking to it. And I think when you read a biography, it's not a how-to book. Sometimes after my Jobs book, people would come up to me and say, "I'm just like Steve Jobs." I go, "Yeah, sure." And I said, "Why?" They say, "Well, if somebody does something that sucks, I tell them it sucks, or I can be an editor." I said, "Wait a minute. You haven't invented the iPhone. You haven't invented the Mac. You don't have the right to do that." This book is not, and this may hurt the sales, but it's not 7 easy lessons to success. It's about a real person with light and dark and complex strands interwoven into an amazing fabric. And sometimes you want to take out some of those dark strands and say, "Man, don't do that. Get rid of that part of your personality." But for the reader, you get to decide, can you take out those strands or will it unravel the whole cloth? And I just tried to tell the tales, all of them so fascinating, tale after tale, that help you understand the warp and the weave of that fabric that's Musk.
All right. I think that's a great way to put it. Walter Isaacson, really appreciate having you on. Again, the link will be down in the description for this book. I would definitely recommend it to everyone. And hopefully we'll find another occasion to talk sometime in the future, Walter. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it.